Imagine standing right in the center of the Parthenon in Athens.
Oh, that is a great place to start.
Right. So the midday Mediterranean sun is just beating down on that brilliant sun-bleached Pentelic marble.
It's almost blinding if you're really there.
Exactly. And if you close your eyes and just let your imagination take over, you might expect to hear the echoes of the ancient Greek world.
Like the Clash of Bronze, or maybe Athenian philosophers talking, something like that.
Yeah, or priests offering sacrifices to Athena. But the thing is, if you actually listen closely to the layers of history trapped inside those massive stone walls, that is not the first thing you hear at all.
Not even close.
No. First, floating through the cool, dim air, you would hear the slow, resonant, incredibly solemn chanting of Christian hymns from a Byzantine choir.
Which just completely throws people off.
It really does. And then, as the centuries roll forward and the light shifts, that sound dissolves into the clear, sharp, melodic call to prayer of an Ottoman muezzin, echoing out across the city at dawn.
It completely shatters the postcard illusion we all carry around,
Totally.
We are so conditioned to view the Parthenon as this frozen, pristine artifact of antiquity, like a dead ruin behind velvet ropes.
Right, something you just look at but don't touch.
Exactly. But the historical reality is that it was a remarkably active, deeply contested, and, well, continuously evolving living space for thousands of years.
And that is exactly our mission for this deep dive today. We're looking at some incredible architectural archives, specifically this fascinating section called the Cross and the Crescent.
It's such a rich source.
It really is. So today we are exploring a profound, almost counterintuitive paradox about one of the most famous structures on the planet.
Which is that it didn't survive by staying pure.
Exactly. The Parthenon didn't survive by staying an untouched, sacred relic hidden away from the world. It survived by constantly shape-shifting.
It's honestly amazing. It managed to endure for over 2 millennia by aggressively adapting to the very empires that conquered it.
So, okay, let's unpack this. Because to see how this survival mechanism actually works in practice, we have to jump forward from the golden age of ancient Greece to the 6th century.
Right, so we are well past the era of Pericles here.
Way past. The Greek gods are officially being evicted. Athens has been deeply absorbed into the Byzantine sphere of influence.
This is a super dangerous time for pagan monuments.
No, absolutely. You would think the Byzantines, being devoutly Christian and eager to stamp out paganism, would look at this colossal pagan temple dedicated to a warrior goddess and just, I don't know, bring in the wrecking balls.
I mean, that is precisely what happened to countless other temples across the Mediterranean during the rise of Christianity.
They were just wiped off the map.
Yeah, completely dismantled, burned, or just left to rot. But the Parthenon possessed a kind of architectural gravity.
What do you mean by gravity?
Well, its proportions were so mathematically perfect, and its presence over the city was so commanding that the Byzantine authorities actually chose a path of transformation rather than destruction.
They couldn't bring themselves to tear it down.
Right. So they decided to repurpose the building into a massive Christian church dedicated to the Virgin Mary.
Which, historically speaking, there is a deep poetic irony there, right?
Oh, definitely. You have the Virgin Mary inheriting the exact physical footprint once occupied by Athena Parthenos, the virgin goddess of ancient Athens.
But wait, let me stop you there, though. Because translating a Greek temple into a Christian church sounds like an absolute logistical nightmare. It really was a huge challenge. Let's think about the architecture for a second. If you look at the Doric order, those massive, sturdy, fluted pillars with no base that stand like tree trunks around the perimeter.
The iconic columns.
Right. And the frieze, which is that continuous band of relief sculptures telling mythological stories up near the roof line.
Yeah.
The entire point of that ancient design is that it is heavily extroverted. It is essentially a monumental stage facing out toward the city.
Exactly. The columns lets the light and the wind sweep right through. The religious rituals actually happened outside.
So how do you take a building that functions as an open-air public pavilion and turn it into a sealed, private sanctuary for quiet internal prayer?
It's tough.
It feels like trying to turn an open-air sports stadium into an intimate, dimly lit library.
That is a great analogy. And what's fascinating here is how the Byzantine architects approached that exact spatial problem.
What did they do?
They introduced a concept we can think of as the vessel of faith. They needed to turn an outward-facing object of admiration into an inward-facing sanctuary of reverence.
Okay, so how do you do that with massive stone columns everywhere?
Well, they went to work on those iconic outer columns. They literally filled the gaps between those massive external Doric pillars with heavy curtain walls, just bricking them up to trap the space inside.
Wow, so they completely choked off the light and the air?
They absolutely did. They changed the entire psychological weight of the building.
That makes sense.
By walling up the perimeter, the focus shifted entirely away from the harsh, bright Mediterranean sun reflecting off the marble exterior.
Right, because you can't see the outside anymore.
Exactly. It forced the attention inward into the dim, mysterious, candlelit interior that Byzantine liturgy really required.
That is such a dramatic shift in vibe.
It was. And they also completely flipped the axis of the building. In ancient times, the main entrance faced east to catch the rising sun.
Okay, and the Byzantines changed that.
Yeah, they sealed that eastern entrance shut, making the west side the new front door.
Interesting.
And in that newly sealed eastern wall, they installed an apse. That's a large semicircular recess that pushed outward, creating the necessary sacred space to house the Christian altar.
There's this deeply human element to this transition that really anchors the history for me from the source material.
Oh, the story of the monks.
Yeah. We aren't just talking about abstract stone and mortar here. We are talking about the actual people doing the chiseling.
Right, the boots on the ground.
Exactly. So consider the Byzantine monks and masons, like the historical overseers who orchestrated this massive renovation. The text gives us this archetypal monk named Leon.
Leon is a great example of the mindset at the time.
Right, so picture Leon standing up on the wooden scaffolding, face to face with these gigantic, centuries-old carvings of centaurs and pagan gods.
He must have been so intimidated.
You'd think so. But his philosophy wasn't about destroying the past out of petty spite. His goal was purification. He instructs his masons to carefully shave down the most blatant mythological figures, just enough to neutralize their pagan identity without destroying the structural integrity of the stone blocks themselves.
It was a very deliberate act of reconsecration.
Yeah, they weren't just smashing things blindly.
Not at all. To the Byzantine builders, they were not committing vandalism. They honestly believed they were performing a rescue mission.
A rescue mission for a building. I love that.
By carving prominent Christian crosses deeply into the ancient marble columns, they were redirecting the building's purpose.
They were taking a structure built for human ambition and pagan mythology and elevating it toward heavenly glory.
They were quite literally baptizing the architecture.
Baptizing the stone itself. And this wasn't some brief experimental phase either.
No, not at all.
This Christian era of the Parthenon lasted for nearly 1,000 years. That is a full millennium of burning incense and singing hymns inside those walled-up columns.
It's a massive chunk of its history that people just forget.
They really do.
Yeah.
But architecture, if it wants to survive on a long enough timeline, always has to be ready for the next wave of history.
And the next wave was huge.
Oh yeah, it came crashing in from the east in the mid-15th century.
The geopolitical map just shifts violently.
Yeah.
The mid-15th century brings the collapse of the Byzantine Empire and the rapid, unstoppable expansion of the Ottoman Empire.
Right.
By 1458, the Ottomans conquer Athens, and the Parthenon is about to undergo its second massive metamorphosis.
From a Byzantine cathedral into an Islamic mosque.
Exactly.
So we have another conquering army rolling into town with a completely different religion, staring up at a massive Christian stronghold.
But the Ottoman ruler, Sultan Mehmed II, has a remarkably restrained reaction when he tours the site.
Yeah, he didn't just burn it down.
No. Sultan Mehmed II was a complex figure. He was a highly educated leader with a deep appreciation for the Renaissance and classical geometry.
So he knew what he was looking at.
He absolutely did. Historical accounts suggest that when he finally stood before the Parthenon, he was struck by its absolute aesthetic perfection.
He recognized the math.
Yes. He flat out refused to let his armies loot or dismantle it. He recognized the genius standing in front of him.
So what did he do?
Well, just as the Byzantines did 1,000 years earlier, he decided to gently fold the structure into his own empire's religious order.
Which brings up another massive mechanical puzzle, honestly.
Right, how do you do it?
Exactly. How do you physically fold a Byzantine church, which is already folded inside an ancient Greek temple, mind you, into a functional Islamic mosque?
It's like architectural inception.
It really is. So how did they pull it off?
You start by reorienting the spiritual compass of the building once again. The Ottomans installed a mihrab inside the sanctuary.
And a mihrab is the niche that points to Mecca, right?
Exactly. It's a designated niche carved into the wall that points directly toward Mecca, establishing the crucial directional axis for Islamic prayer.
Got it.
But the most dramatic and highly visible change wasn't happening inside the sanctuary. It was happening up on the skyline.
Ah, the minaret.
Yes, they constructed a towering minaret on the southwest corner of the Parthenon.
And honestly, from a purely visual standpoint, this sounds like a chaotic clash of design languages.
That does sound pretty jarring.
Because the Parthenon is globally famous for its calming, grounded, horizontal lines, jabbing a sharp vertical tower straight up into the sky from its corner. It almost feels like architectural heresy.
If we connect this to the bigger engineering picture, though, the Ottomans actually demonstrated an immense amount of structural respect and ingenuity.
Really?
Yeah.
Because a tower seems super heavy.
Oh, it is. Think about the sheer gravitational nightmare of building a tall, heavy stone tower on top of a 2,000-year-old marble roof.
Right, the roof wasn't designed for that.
Exactly. If done poorly, the immense downward pressure would have instantly crushed the ancient foundations and brought that entire corner of the temple crashing down.
So how did the Ottoman architects pull that off? You can't just stack tons of stone on a fragile roof and hope for the best.
Well, they didn't build it from scratch, and they didn't place it on fragile footing.
What do you mean?
The Ottoman architect in charge of the transformation realized that the Byzantines had previously constructed a sturdy stone bell tower on that exact southwest corner.
Oh, so the Christians had already tested the weight there.
Yes. So instead of tearing the bell tower down, the Ottoman architect used its existing internal spiral staircase as the core structural spine for the new minaret.
That is so smart.
By utilizing the load-bearing pathways that the Christians had already established, he perfectly distributed the massive weight of the new Islamic tower all the way down into the bedrock.
Without putting any new stress on the original ancient Greek columns.
Exactly.
That is brilliant problem solving. Threading an Islamic minaret through the skeleton of a Christian bell tower, all of it resting on the feet of a Greek temple.
It's a perfect physical metaphor for the building's history.
It really is. But there is one specific detail from this Ottoman era that stopped me in my tracks. When I read about this next part in our source material, my jaw absolutely dropped.
Let me guess. The plaster.
Yes. It feels like pure cultural vandalism, and I imagine anyone listening to this deep dive right now is going to wince at the thought of it.
You're referring to the whitewashing of the interior.
I am. We have accounts of Ottoman masons. Let's look at a master mason named Yusuf from the text, who are ordered to take buckets of plain, wet, white plaster and just slather it over the glorious, intricately painted Byzantine murals.
It sounds horrifying to modern ears.
It does. We are talking about centuries of irreplaceable art, vibrant gold leaf, images of the Virgin Mary, and glowing saints being completely erased by cheap white paste. How do we not look at that as a tragic destruction of history?
It is entirely understandable to feel that way through a modern lens. We have to analyze the religious constraints the Ottomans were operating under at the time.
Okay, fair enough. What were those constraints?
Well, the Islamic faith, particularly in its sacred spaces, is strictly aniconic.
Meaning no images.
Right. Islamic law explicitly forbade the depiction of human faces or divine figures in a place of worship.
Ah, I see.
The Ottoman authorities were actually under immense theological pressure to take hammers to those walls and literally smash those Byzantine murals and pagan reliefs into dust.
Wait, so the plaster wasn't a form of destruction?
Quite the opposite. The mason, Yusuf, makes a conscious choice. He tells his apprentices not to break the faces with their hammers, but rather to, quote, put them to sleep.
Oh, wow. Put them to sleep.
By choosing the path of concealment over the path of destruction, that thick layer of white plaster actually acted as a miraculous time capsule.
That changes how I look at it entirely. The plaster became a shield.
Precisely. Think about what Athens went through in the centuries that followed.
A lot of conflict.
A ton. There were brutal wars, bombings, severe industrial pollution, and incredibly corrosive acid rain in the modern era.
Right.
If those delicate Byzantine murals and ancient stone reliefs had been left exposed to the elements, the weather and the pollution would have entirely eaten them away.
So the plaster saved them.
Yes. That cheap white plaster became a sacrificial layer. It took the damage, shielding the ancient art underneath. It transformed the Parthenon into what historians call a palimpsest.
A palimpsest, just to clarify that term for anyone who might not be familiar, a palimpsest is what happens when you have an ancient parchment manuscript and a scribe scrapes off the old ink to write a new story over it.
Right.
But because they didn't erase it perfectly, you can still see the faint, ghostly outlines of the original writing underneath the new text.
That is exactly right. The Parthenon became a massive three-dimensional architectural palimpsest.
That is such a cool concept.
Underneath the stark, minimalist white walls of the Ottoman Mosque, the vibrant, glowing colors of the Christian church, and the ancient chiseling of the pagan temple were literally sealed in time.
Just waiting to be found.
Exactly. They were preserved in the dark, waiting for future generations of archaeologists to rediscover them.
So the very act of erasing the history is the only reason the history survived.
Which is an incredible paradox.
It really is. The building's skin changed from bright pagan colors to Christian murals to Islamic white plaster. Its purpose shifted from looking out to looking in to facing Mecca.
Constantly adapting.
But zooming out from the paint and the plaster, it brings up a massive physical question. How did the actual stones, the literal massive marble columns of the Parthenon, bear the literal weight of all these renovations?
And not to mention the environmental stress.
Right, without just collapsing under the stress.
To answer the question of its physical survival, we have to look past the religious symbols and the shifting empires and look directly at the hidden brilliance of the ancient Greek engineering itself.
This part of the source text really got me. Imagine being an Ottoman guard, let's call him Hassan, working the night shift on the Acropolis.
A very lonely job.
Very. He leans his back against one of those massive, cool marble columns. And in that quiet moment, he marvels at the tactile reality of the stone. He realizes that these massive pillars stood long before his conquering army ever arrived, and they feel so incredibly stubborn that they will undoubtedly stand long after his empire eventually falls.
Hassan was sensing something fundamental about the mechanics of the architecture.
What do you mean?
Well, whether those columns were carrying a Byzantine cross, an Ottoman crescent moon, or an ancient Greek frieze, the stones just silently did their job.
But I need to understand how Athens sits in a highly active seismic zone.
Oh yeah, lots of earthquakes.
It is incredibly prone to earthquakes. You have thousands of tons of marble, constant structural modifications from different empires, and eventually even cannon fire and explosions in later centuries.
Which did cause some major damage later on, but the core survived.
Right, but how do these columns not just snap in half when the ground starts shaking?
This raises an important question about how we, in the modern world, define strength in architecture.
Okay.
When we think of a strong, earthquake-proof building today, we think of rigidity. We picture solid, concrete, heavy rebar, and thick steel beams bolted tightly together so that the building absolutely cannot move.
Exactly. You want it stiff.
But the secret of the Parthenon is exactly the opposite. It relies on a technique called dry masonry.
Dry masonry, meaning there is zero mortar, no cement or glue holding those massive stone blocks together.
None whatsoever. There is no mortar gluing the column drums together. The columns aren't one solid piece of stone. They are made up of stacked cylindrical blocks called drums.
Right, like giant checkers stacked on top of each other.
Exactly. To keep them aligned, the ancient Greeks carved a square hole right in the center of each drum. Inside those holes, they placed thick iron cores, essentially iron pegs, to connect the blocks vertically.
Hold on, let me push back on that because that doesn't make intuitive sense to me. Iron rusts.
It sure does.
And when iron rusts, it expands. Expanding metal inside solid marble is a recipe for cracking the stone wide open.
You're not wrong.
Furthermore, iron is rigid. In an earthquake, a rigid iron peg is going to tear right through the marble as the ground shakes. That sounds like a ticking time bomb built into the foundation.
You are exactly right about the properties of iron, which is why the Greek engineers did something astonishing to mitigate that exact problem.
What did they do?
They didn't just drop the raw iron pegs into the stone holes. Before sealing the blocks together, they wrapped the iron cores entirely in lead.
Lead, like the highly toxic but very soft metal.
Yes, lead. Lead is highly malleable. It is practically squishy compared to iron and marble.
Okay, so what does that do?
By wrapping the joints in lead, they created a built-in shock absorber. When an earthquake hits, or when massive, heavy modifications are made to the roof by a conquering empire, the column drums do not stay rigidly in place.
They move.
Yes. The lead lining deforms slightly, allowing those massive marble blocks to actually flex and gently repel each other.
Wow.
They slide and shimmy by mere millimeters, absorbing the kinetic energy of the shock waves. And then, as the shaking stops, gravity pulls them right back into their perfectly aligned resting place.
So the lead is acting exactly like the shock absorbers on a mountain bike, or the crumple zone in the front of a car.
That is a perfect analogy. The lead takes the kinetic beating, dispersing the energy so the stone remains unharmed.
That is incredible. And what I find so compelling about this is the philosophical takeaway.
How so?
Well, the physical flexibility of the stones perfectly mirrors the historical flexibility of the building.
Oh, I see.
It survived physically because it could bend in the face of literal earthquakes, thanks to those lead-wrapped joints. And it survived metaphorically because it could bend in the face of historical earthquakes, allowing new civilizations to repurpose its walls.
It yielded just enough to survive without ever losing its fundamental structural integrity.
It never rigidly said no to a new empire. It just absorbed the shock, changed its identity, and kept standing.
And I think the greatest lesson the Parthenon offers to you, the listener, is a profound lesson in humility.
Humility from a massive monument.
Yes. The original ancient Greek architects, Ectinus and Callicrates, built something so mechanically sound and so perfectly proportioned that future rival empires simply couldn't bear to tear it down.
That makes sense.
The building's excellence commanded respect from its enemies. It forced conquerors to become its caretakers.
It is an absolute masterclass in survival.
Truly.
We've seen how it let go of its original identity, acting as a Christian vessel of faith, wearing the protective whitewash of an Islamic mosque, and relying on its brilliant, flexible joints to weather the centuries.
It really reframes how we look at architecture.
It does, which leaves me with a thought that I cannot shake, and I want to pass it on to you to mull over as you go about your day.
Let's hear it.
It has to do with the ego of modern design versus the humility of the palimpsest. Today, when our top architects design a monumental building, the goal is often ultimate, untouchable authorship.
Right, they want their specific vision frozen in time.
Exactly. We build highly specific, unyielding structures, glass and steel museums, hyper-customized corporate headquarters, with the expectation that our singular vision will be preserved exactly as we built it forever.
We demand total control over the legacy of our monuments.
But the Parthenon only survived 2.5 millennia because its original creators eventually lost control of their narrative. The building survived precisely because it was capable of being hacked, overwritten, and entirely reimagined by people who didn't share the original architect's worldview.
It invited adaptation.
So the question is, in our modern obsession with creating untouchable masterpieces, have we lost the ability to build true palimpsests?
That's a great question.
Are we brave enough to design monuments today that invite the future to overwrite us? Because if we aren't willing to surrender our architecture to the next civilization, maybe that's exactly why our buildings won't last another 2,000 years.
All right, welcome to This Explainer. You know, when we picture the Parthenon today, sitting way up high atop the Acropolis, we tend to picture this frozen, pristine symbol of ancient Greece, right? But here's the thing. To survive for millennia, this massive structure absolutely did not stand still. In fact, it constantly adapted to some pretty radical shifts. So today we're going to dive right into the architectural lifeblood of this incredible building. We're going to see exactly how it survived the dramatic rise and fall of empires through a truly fascinating process of constant transformation. There's this brilliant observation from architectural researcher Grace Kim that perfectly sets the stage for us. She notes that architecture actually has a survival instinct. Usually, buildings of this massive scale are just torn down when a civilization collapses, to make way for the new regime. But instead of crumbling to dust, the Parthenon learned entirely new vocabularies. As Grace Kim points out while exploring the site with Dr. Lee Han, this single structure shifted its purpose, changed its orientation, and adapted its interior to accommodate the shifting tides of completely different human belief systems. Looking at this staggering 2,500-year timeline, you can clearly trace these dramatic shifts. For nearly 800 years, it was strictly the domain of the Greek goddess Athena. Then, by the 6th century AD, as Byzantine influence swept over Athens, it transformed into a sanctuary for the Virgin Mary. Interestingly enough, transitioning from one virgin goddess to another. Fast forward to the 15th century under the Ottoman Empire, and the magnificent structure was transformed yet again, this time into a mosque dedicated to Allah. Each one of these eras could have easily destroyed what came before, but amazingly, they chose to build upon it instead. Okay, so what's really wild about the 6th century Byzantine era is how it completely flipped the spatial purpose of the building. Dr. Lee Han notes that while the external shell remained, the actual weight of the air inside drastically changed. See, a pagan Greek temple was designed as an external object of worship. You stood outside to marvel at it. But a Christian church? That was an internal vessel of faith, a closed-off place for inward reflection. So, to achieve that quiet reverence, the original eastern entrance was totally closed off. They carved out a new western entrance and installed a semicircular apse in the east to align perfectly with Christian customs. They even walled up the spaces between those massive columns. To kind of wrap our heads around the mindset behind this huge transition, the source material uses the fictional character of a monk named Leon. Just imagine Leon in the 6th century, carefully watching craftsmen scrape away all the overt pagan symbols. He tells an anxious stonemason, "Hey, we aren't destroying these magnificent walls, we are purifying them." The idea was that the raw human ambition carved into the ancient marble was simply being replaced by the unseen glory of heaven. The incredible structural strength of those massive door columns was retained, but their spiritual assignment was completely rewritten. And this brings us to a really crucial concept, the palimpsest. Originally, a palimpsest was a piece of parchment where old writing was literally scraped off so you could write new text over it, but the old words always left this faint, ghostly trace behind. Well, the Parthenon became an architectural palimpsest. Each new empire painted over the last, adding a brand new layer of history without truly erasing what came before. It's incredible. You can literally walk up to the columns today and see the chisel marks of ancient Greek stonemasons, completely overlaid with faded Byzantine crosses, which are overlaid again by Ottoman scuff marks. It's all right there. Fast forward to the 15th century, and the Ottoman Empire takes control. Historical accounts tell us that Sultan Mehmed II was absolutely awestruck by the Parthenon's perfect proportions. Our source material illustrates this profound respect through characters like the Ottoman architect Ibrahim. Ibrahim recognizes that even though the building belonged to so-called infidels, the geometric truth of its proportions resonated perfectly with the divine order of Allah. So they made a highly conscious, deliberate decision: do not destroy this massive order. Instead, they carefully integrated the structure into the Islamic faith, choosing to just add their own architectural prayers to the ancient stone. So how did they pull this off? Well, the Ottomans ingeniously transformed the space without destroying it. They kept the core Byzantine walls and installed a mihrab inside, which is a niche that indicates the direction of Mecca. But structurally, the absolute most striking addition was on the outside, a towering minaret. And here's the genius part. Instead of smashing a massive hole in the roof to build it, they placed it exactly on the footprint of the existing Christian spiral bell tower in the southwest corner. They literally utilized the load-bearing pathways that were already there. It was this vertical Islamic challenge to the horizontal Greek geometry, but executed with just immense architectural respect. And this perfectly sets up what I think is a profound historical irony. To officially convert the space into a proper mosque, strict Islamic law required covering up any vivid Christian icons or pagan faces. The source text brings this to life through Yusuf, a master mason, who decides to use a brush instead of a hammer, putting the idols to sleep beneath a really thick layer of white limewash. But here is the amazing part. That very whitewash ended up acting as a sacrificial shield. For centuries, it protected all that delicate ancient and Byzantine art underneath from brutal weathering, heavy winds, and eventually modern acid rain. The attempt to hide the history is literally what preserved it. Picture this, an Ottoman guard, Hassan, leaning against the cool marble in the blazing heat of an Athens afternoon, listening to the call to prayer echoing through these ancient columns. It hits him that these stones are just utterly indifferent to the human dramas unfolding beneath them. They stood long before his empire arrived, and they are definitely going to stand long after it leaves. The stones possess this kind of stubbornness that easily outlasts any single religion or invading army. But, as our researchers point out, calling them stubborn isn't actually entirely accurate from an engineering perspective. Their endurance isn't about being rigidly unyielding. Because just when you think this whole explainer is purely a story about cultural adaptation, boom, we uncovered the incredible engineering secret to its physical survival: dry masonry. See, the ancient Greeks did not use a single drop of mortar or cement to glue these massive column drums together. No way. Instead, they relied entirely on gravity and these unbelievably precise, airtight joints. But the real magic, the thing that truly saved the building, was what was hiding right inside those joints. Hidden completely out of sight, right in the center of the stacked marble drums, the Greeks placed iron cores wrapped in lead. This was a total game changer. It meant that when a massive earthquake hit, or when the building was subjected to any immense external forces, the individual column drums didn't just snap under the rigid pressure. The lead allowed them to subtly sway. They could micro-shift to absorb the seismic shock before settling perfectly right back into place. The physical flexibility of the architecture perfectly mirrors its cultural flexibility. True resilience, whether you're facing an earthquake or a conquering empire, isn't rigid stubbornness. It is the ability to absorb the shock, sway with the times, and somehow remain standing. As we wrap up this explainer, we are left with a really striking image. While humans down below fought and constantly renamed the site in the names of shifting gods, those massive columns just continued their silent duty. They didn't push back, they simply adapted. Today, we build with rigid concrete and unyielding steel, often designing structures for one single, highly specific purpose, and we just demolish them when that purpose ends. So it really forces us to ask, what kind of architectural and cultural flexibility are we leaving behind? Will absolutely any of our modern structures be capable of learning a new language 1,000 years from now? Thank you so much for exploring this fascinating architectural palimpsest with me today.